Hi, everybody, and welcome to our next CEO interview series with Amanda Baldwin, the CEO of Supergoop. Hey, Amanda.
Great to see you. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We've really been looking forward to this, and obviously, so many folks that are listening that are already customers and amazing brand advocates of Supergoop and all of your product line. For those of you that are joining us now for, so many episodes into the series, thank you. For those of you coming for the first time, we're excited to have you. This is a series that we do of If I Knew Then conversations with amazing CEOs and leaders like Amanda, in combination with Entrepreneur Media and Comparably. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Comparably, which is an employee review platform and a SaaS company to help organizations with their employer brand. And my background is that I've been a serial entrepreneur my whole life. I started and sold a couple different businesses, raised money for lots of companies. And I've always had the really unique pleasure and privilege of being surrounded by amazing CEOs like you, Amanda, that have been my investors and mentors and getting to learn from you. And so a big reason that we do the series is just to take this amazing wisdom and knowledge that you've built up through your career and to share it with as many folks as possible. And so, we're excited to dive in today. Again, I think so many folks listening are already your customers, but in your own words, how do you describe Supergoop today?
First of all, thank you. Thank you to all the fans. We really appreciate it. So Supergoop is the first and only lifestyle brand 100% dedicated to protecting the skin. For that, AKA sunscreen and SPF. And our mission is really to change the way the world thinks about sunscreen. And it's very much motivated at its heart by our founder, Holly Thagard, who created this brand because she had a friend who was diagnosed with skin cancer at age 29. And it will affect 1 in 5 people in this globe, and yet it's highly preventable. So there's a pretty serious subject at the heart of something that, a brand that's all about smiling. And I think it's great to know about that history and really what we focus on is delivering products that people love to wear. And in our category, that is truly unique point of view. We really believe that we're creating an entirely new perspective on sunscreen and protecting the skin.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to have a business that just is, so many people love and delights, but also to have, a mission behind that business that's so meaningful. How do you think overall about running a mission-based business like that? And certainly kind of taking over for a founder that started it, the importance and meaning it has to carry on the mission of why that company was started in the first place.
Yeah, I believe that having a mission is the greatest gift you can give somebody like me, because both internally and externally, all the tough questions are obvious. So when you're making strategic decisions, you just kind of go back to that mission and you ask yourself, is this in service of that? Then we should do it, and if not, then we shouldn't. And that sounds simple, but it often, has become a really important thing that I've gone back to time and time again, especially when the answers aren't so obvious, when you're facing a tougher challenge. I think it's been really important to us also internally in terms of how we recruit people. The thing that binds us all together is a real belief in this mission and a passion for it. And I think it's become something that is more commonplace and more desirable in today's world. But Supergoop was the first kernel of an idea was back in about 2001 for Holly, and the brand launched in 2005. So we were doing a lot of things that are now, hip, before it was cool to do it, because it kind of comes back to that mission. So the depth of this brand and its realness was the thing that really excited me when I first started to talk to Holly and kind of go down the amazing journey that we are on for the last 5 years together. Was just something that I thought was really special and unique. And it really came down to just having a really strong perspective about changing the world. And that is a really exciting thing to get up and do every day.
Yeah. So I'd love to actually dive into some of your tactical advice for a moment on how you build that why in your company and get everybody as connected with the mission. And I'll share with you a brief example. I'll share you 2 from my side. I had a previous internet company that we sold to Intuit, and their CEO at the time, Brad Smith, who led that company through an amazing growth period, was just really exceptional, Amanda, at building alignment at a company with so many thousands of global employees, right? And I just really took notice how much time, and he would talk to me about how so much of his job as CEO was just communicating the most important principles. And even for us at still a relatively small company, we do weekly all hands, and every quarter I tell the founding story of Comparably when I go over, our key metrics from a board meeting, because I always want to remind people what our why is you've been leading a company here that's been growing and so many people are joining it and growing within it. How do you implement the why? Like, how do you make your team feel connected to the mission and really ambassadors of what that mission is and everything they do?
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up probably the most important part of it, which is the intentionality behind that, right? I don't think that culture or connection in a team happen by accident. Culture is a product of decisions. It's a product of people. It's a product of being really thoughtful about it. So I think what you're saying, and the examples that you already gave are probably the first piece of advice that I'd give everyone is don't take it for granted. And I will actually rewind to when I was about a year in and I was just starting to hire some of our first fabulous employees, and something special was really starting to gel. I actually, and this is, another piece of advice of something I do all the time, is if I'm facing a question, I start asking any other CEO who's been there before in a similar, well, what did you do? And I walked away and I was sort of saying, well, how do you build culture? I was literally going around asking people that. And what came back to me was you build it intentionally. And so I think that was one of the most important things. And we sat down and we wrote down what our values, which is separate from a mission, right? A mission is something that separates, is a different thing than your culture and values. And we wrote them down, and we have this amazing copywriter who turned it into these magical things, and they sit on the wall in our offices. So I think not taking it for granted is probably the most important thing. I think for us with the mission, it also starts with every single person on our team has some little nugget of a story that connected them to why SPF, why sunscreen, why skin cancer, why Supergoop. And it's different for everybody, but it exists. And I think it was, I actually in that sort of initial early moment around building the culture, I think I had about 10 or 15 people on the team, and I went and interviewed everybody. And I said, why did you come? And why are you still here? And that was the universal. There were a few other things, but that was really powerful. And it came through, and it made me realize that as we were hiring, and now we're big enough that I don't make every single hire anymore. But knowing and starting to systematize this idea of, for us, we are not backward engineering into a mission. We had one to begin with, that you have to have that connection to it. And again, it doesn't have to be the same answer. It shouldn't be the same answer for everybody, but there's something that needs to come out in that interview process that needs to be built into somebody from day one, um, that we look for, and how we hire. So I think it has to do with who you bring into the organization, but then also how you run the organization every day, and how you empower people to make the decisions that I think everybody kind of knows that. And so we all use that mission as the guide for what we're doing.
Yeah. What are some things today, a couple years, as a CEO today, that you do differently to drive that culture intentionally than maybe you would have done a couple years ago, or that you didn't know to do 10 years ago? Like what's been the on the job training that taught you what you implement right now?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think there's so many things. One is just practice. I'm a first time CEO, and I'm not afraid to say that, and to say that I get some things right and I could do other things better. And like anything else in life, practice definitely, I don't know that it makes perfect, but it definitely makes better. And so there's just something that comes with time that has, I think, improved how I handle things. Now, I also say that our organization has grown tremendously. So, as a leader leading 10 people and then 20 and then 40 and now inching up to 70, there are really different types of leadership that are required when you are sitting in the same room. as everybody, to when you're leading through Zoom. And that those are, and I think just sort of recognizing that those are different is really important. And I also think we're in this sort of moment where the last year has elevated a conversation that I think is important about what does it really mean to be a leader in the first place,
Mhm.
um, and and how you lead and what you're expected to do and what you need to do as a leader, I think is fundamentally shifting for the better. But it also means you have to sort of be I'm always trying to think about what's happening around me, what's happening in my people's lives, not just what's happening in the office, or the virtual office, whatever we're going to call it these days, and try to just always be on the forefront of that. So, I definitely read and engage and try. I treat leadership like anything else in my life, that it's a skill I can get better at. It's not. I don't
Mhm.
really believe I was born with these skills and I just show up every day and the world is benefiting from them. It's like anything else. I practice it, I get better at it, I make mistakes. I have a team that wonderfully will accept that and will call me out when I need to be called out and be like, hey Amanda, this, and I think that's a creating that kind of environment is really, really important. I think it's one of the bigger lessons I've learned is you got to create an environment in which people aren't, people feel like they can tell you when something needs to be done differently. And I love the feedback, and I think it's really important.
Yeah. So I'd love to explore your career a little bit and how you've achieved such amazing things. And you've got this amazing background as an investor and in finance as well. Um, I think you told me you grew up in New York,
Mhm.
right? That's where my whole family's from. My mom grew up in the Catskills. I was the only one out of all their kids that actually was born here in Los Angeles. So I'm with you in heart. Where did you first start your professional career? Like, what was your very first job?
My very first job was working in an art gallery on 23rd Street. So it was not in anything. Well, I guess it's creative. I think that it was a business that was creative. So I say it has nothing to do with what I'm doing, but it actually probably does. So that was my first lucky break. Was getting a chance to spend my summer amongst sort of amazing works of art. For they're all Roman and Greek antiquities, so pretty interesting stuff, that I still think about very fondly.
And did you have, you know, in school and in the early part of your career, did you have a vision for where you want to take your career? Were you really ambitious? Did you find that what a lot of, folks tell us is that they just kind of followed a path and, stumbled into lots of amazing things? Like, how much intentionality did you have about your career early on?
I think my interests were always clear. I think my career evolved to figure out how to align my interests with what I was actually doing every day, and I think, again, back to advice, I think the best thing you can do is figure out what you love to do and then figure out how to make your career that versus the other way around. And so I when I look back on it, I always knew what I was passionate about. I've always been passionate about creativity, design. The first job I ever wanted was to design store windows because, I walk around New York City and I was like, well, how are they selling that? So there was some instincts that came very early on about branding and storytelling as a interesting way to uncover creativity. So that was evident, I think, probably just from the beginning for me. And I think, like I said, over time, I figured out how to turn that into a career, which is effectively running a consumer brand. And so there, that connection and the story in between is a series of test, learn, iterate of, okay, we start here and then we see what we like and what we maybe wish we could not do every day, and then try and do a little bit more of what I love and a little bit less of the thing that I'm not as passionate about, and kind of really falling into a place where I felt like the demands of the job were 100% aligned with what I'm best at. And I think I finally nailed it. Doesn't mean that there won't be more iterations along the way, but I think I've kind of come to this place where running a consumer brand that's in a high growth situation is playing to the things that I'm passionate about and also playing to my strengths. And I think those are related, but not 100% the same.
Yeah. So let's talk about you. Can you talk about a little bit your career progression? Like, after that art studio, like what were the big stepping stones to where you got today?
Um, So, it'll all look like it was very well planned, but like I said, it's very important to recognize that I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I was thoughtful about why I was doing what I was doing. For me, the journey really began in college when, and this does show you there's a little bit of luck. I'd been a gymnast my whole life. Talk about how much influence that had on me. And all of a sudden I wasn't doing that anymore. I had a lot of time to fill. So I ended up in the sort of, they called it the comp, like getting onto the business board of the newspaper. And I actually thought I was in talks to get onto the journalism side. I thought that was what I was interested in. And I literally walked into the wrong room. Like, that is a true story. And was like, oh, wait a second, there's this advertising thing, like back to what I was interested in, brand. And all of a sudden I started selling ads for the newspaper in college, and still have some very close friends from doing that. And that started this journey that I've been on of like, okay, how do you connect creativity with business? How do you create aesthetics and numbers, and how do they all intertwined? And coming out of that experience, I went to Harvard undergrad. There wasn't a pre-professional bent to it. And so the way that you got business training, which somehow I had sort of come to the conclusion that that's what I needed, coming out of college, was you became an investment banker or consultant. And I ended up at Goldman Sachs for my first 2 years out of college, and had just a life alteringly amazing experience, and got the incredible boot camp that you do as an investment banking analyst. And
So what was so amazing about it? Because so many folks share that experience. Like, what happened in those 2 years that was so transformative?
I learned what a business really is and how it works, and how and I often talk about this, that I literally would sit and I would build the Excel models, right? And so I learned how all the pieces of the puzzle in a business are reported on and how they're intertwined. And so when I sit here in my seat today and I think about, like, okay, we're going to invest in this, or we're going to make this decision, I can think about it numerically. What's the impact on the P&L, the cash flow, the balance sheet? Because I literally had to build it from the ground up, and understood how those things worked, and understood how you create value in an organization, and what does that even mean? So it was a very, if my early years had been super creative and very aesthetically driven, and that was the thing that I spent a lot of time on in college, was branding and why do brands matter. My Goldman was the other half of the equation, which is the numbers that support that. And I think for me, that was sort of, again, a beginning of a journey of a yin and the yang between the two of those. And it's just an amazing place with a lot of people who are willing to teach young people, and give them a lot of responsibility, uh, and to sit in some incredible rooms. I think, just the things that I would soak up, and hearing CEOs talk about their strategy, and people advising on it, I think was just really pivotal for me. So that was amazing. And you do 2 years, and then it's pretty typical to leave afterwards. And I had an opportunity to go to a private equity firm. So sort of another iteration on this concept of how do you understand the numbers and how do you create value. And there I was focused all on consumer businesses. So that was where the light bulb went off for me of um, what how great, honestly, consumer businesses can be as fundamental businesses, and how much fun they are, and kind of translating some of my early interests into, well, where could I actually go work and do that? And one of the more formative experiences there was sort of being around a lot of these businesses, investing in them, and having a light bulb go off for me of like, well, I kind of think that looks like the thing I want to be doing. So, you got to get into this test, learn, iterate mode, right? Of, okay, now I've gone from super high level in a bank and transactional to like being with businesses for a longer time, to be like, well, what would happen if I was actually in the business? And so that was the path there. And I always felt like I would be a stronger investor if I had operating experience. And I think in your early career, trying a lot of things is really important, to try and build out a set of experiences and a breadth of a set of experiences. So I ended up going back to business school, with the intention of running a beauty brand. So wrote the little essay for Wharton about that, and been on that path ever since. But it really was that moment sitting there and saying, well, I think I want to be here when, when the board meeting's over. And I want to see what it's like to actually execute on the strategy and really be around the people who are driving the creative. I think in the financial world, which I love and am so super passionate about, it's less about the direct interaction with product and creative, which for me is just a huge source of joy. And getting my, maybe it goes back to that art gallery, right? Of like
Yeah.
holding something in my hand that's beautiful. I still feel that about a product that we create and packaging and the design behind it. So that's kind of how that pivot into industry worked. I can keep going. Should I keep going? Is that the get all the way to Supergoop? There's
Yeah.
certainly many
Well, I
steps.
think there are a couple of really interesting things. I mean, I love the story of just walking into the wrong room. I mean, you might have been the next, right, great American journalist, if you just opened up a different door. So
Mhm.
that's really incredible. One of the things I often remember is like whether when I was in grad school, Amanda, or just at different points, I would have the opportunity to meet somebody or be around them that was at some point that I wanted to get to.
Mhm.
And I would make these mental notes of if I was in their shoes, like this is what I would do differently. Like this is what I would think I could do better. This is what I would try to do differently. And I'm sure there was a ton of ego involved in that. Did you, as you sat in all these rooms with these CEOs, did you start to develop that same kind of like mental model where you were building in your head what you would want to do differently, or how you would be as a CEO in those positions? Because you had this amazing window not only into businesses, but as you said, into the mind of all these amazing company leaders, through your time in private equity and at Goldman.
Yeah. Look, and I would extend that time to, the periods of time that I've spent since business school and Lauder and LVMH and L Catterton and I've been around. I've had, the great, extraordinary privilege of being around a lot of incredible leaders. I would say the way that I sort of absorb the information is actually more looking for what they're each uniquely wildly good at. And so I think that, and it's funny as I say this, like a flash of boardrooms runs through my head, and every single person that I was in contact with, I think I kind of quickly zeroed in on this person's special, unique gift. And when I think about how I kind of say this, but I don't really believe in leadership style because I think that suggests something that's very fixed. And I think leadership's much more flexible than that. But I definitely was along the way collecting nuggets, and saying, okay, well, that person taught me, my first boss at Clinique, I learned from her the power of relationships and humor because she could walk into a room and just ease whatever the sort of tension might have been with just a smile and a good joke. And I'm not very funny, so I haven't learned that part, but I learned why that mattered. And I saw I had some people that I worked for who were incredibly fiery and passionate, and I learned from them the importance of that. And then I had other people who were always cool as a cucumber and never ruffled by anything, and I learned the power of that. And so that was how I was absorbing all of that, in addition to saying, like, how are they making their strategic moves? But I think when I think about those experiences, they were very much about learning what made each person special, and really trying to absorb that.
In addition to your boss at Clinique, who would you say are the one or two folks that you learned the most from in your career, and what were those lessons?
It's every single woman or man that I've had a privilege to work for. Every single one. And every single one I have and will continue to write notes to tell them about, like, okay, I was in this situation at Supergoop and I drew on my inner blank because I knew that this was the situation that would call for that. There aren't one or two. It's every single one. And it's the people that I worked for, with, who worked for me. I think it goes in all the different directions. And I always believe I can learn something from everybody. And really sort of appreciating what people's individual strengths are, and really trying to draw on that.
Yeah. One of the questions that I often find interesting to ask and to hear folks' answers to is, who have you learned the most from that's worked for you? Because I think we often think of, we're learning from folks that, we're looking up to and aspiring to be. And I'll give you an example. I had a VP of engineering in a previous life, and he also had this amazing background in the military. And he told me, he's like, Jason, the team that feels responsible and committed to each other, instead of just responsible and committed to their manager, is going to drastically outperform every time. And I just found that so valuable and empowering, because I was still a young CEO, and I felt like so much of my job was to, you know, get the best out of folks and get them to want to follow me and be able to unlock their talents. And I think I deprioritized their sense of commitment to each other. Right. And it just immediately, when he said it, struck me as so true, and something that I was so under optimizing for, and honestly not good at, at doing, that I've tried to work a lot more on. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, like either today at Supergoop and past roles, like who's someone that works for you that you learned a lot from?
I'm gonna have again trouble singling out anybody, and it's not because there's not there just is, again, there's not one person. It's about different people teaching me different things. I do very, very much subscribe to this theory of I guess the best way I would say it is, the thing that tells me I'm doing the right job is when I step away from what's going on, and I watch the interaction of the rest of my team. And if I see smiles and laughter, then I know, like, I got this. It's funny. I remember at one of the portfolio companies I was working on at L Catterton, I was like in a car, big van, coming back with my team, and they were all just crying with laughter, like about something that I don't even remember what it was. And it was one of the best feelings of my career and best moments of my career,
Mm,
because I was like, okay, somehow we created a mix in this little van that created that. And that's what I really look for. It's been the hardest thing for me about COVID and Zoom, is like, that's really hard to do through screens.
yeah.
And it's the thing that weighs on me, because like that's what I look for, and that's what that gelling. And when people, when we get on our board meetings now, I just sort of like beam with pride at the interlocking way in which the team is working. So I think your person was right. I mean, it's sort of I read a book by a Harvard Business School professor that said that leadership is what happens when you're not in the room. And that line just really stuck with me, because it's Frances Fry. She's a wonderful professor, and it just really struck me, because leadership isn't about you. I mean, like me, it's about everybody else, and that just, I think, is a really beautiful way to sum it all up.
Yeah. So in the same way you've talked about these, superpowers and defining characteristics of the people that you've worked for and the things that you've learned from them, how would people describe that about you? Like, what is your really distinguishing, amazing capability that other people are learning from and that sets you apart from other folks?
I think I'm a big believer that if you don't dream big, you're never going to get there. So I think that, one of my, I hope, superpowers is getting people to do the things they didn't even know were possible. Um, because it starts with hiring extraordinary people, right? And really working to say, it's my job to open doors and clear out obstacles, and let them soar. And and I hope that that's what I'm doing every day. is having people be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that. And every day at Supergoop, we have my favorite Slack channel is this kudos channel where it just is like on fire all the time. Like, here's this crazy thing that we did. And it's like every day there's something that's just, if you asked us a year ago, did we think, would we, and we just, that's what is so exciting about what we're building is, it's just about how can we see something, and that's what Supergroup is really about, right? We're creating a category, we're changing consumer behavior, we're doing something that's never been done before. And so you got to think about what maybe wasn't possible. And I think that's in the origin story of the brand. That's in who Holly is as a person. It's who I am as a person. It's who our team is. It's what our brand is about. So I think for me, that's really what I hope to enable everybody to do.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to do the time machine, right?
Okay.
And so if you could take a time machine back into your 20s and you could give that version of Amanda any professional advice, what would it be and why?
What I always tell myself, and I'm terrible at this, is, life is a journey, not a destination. I say that, and it's still a work in progress. I think just sort of slowing down and letting it wash over you. I definitely tend to always be onto the next thing. It's probably my biggest piece of personal feedback. And yeah, I think I'd tell myself that. I tell myself that now. I'd also tell the 40-year-old version of myself that.
Yeah.
So not that I figured it out, but I think I've realized that it's important.
Yeah. There was an interview I saw recently with Tom Hanks, and an interviewer asked him, what's the most important piece of wisdom or advice that you've ever got or internalized? And he said, this too shall pass.
Mm. Hmm. Yep. I think that's very true.
Yeah, it feels similar to what you talked about a little bit. And I certainly felt like that's a very valuable lesson, for me. And my guess is that you and I are similar. One of the things I've always felt that sometimes it's hard to relate to other people, and I wish it wasn't this way, but I have this very intense sense of urgency. Like anything that's important to me, I feel like it has to get done immediately. And I often feel like my life is a clock ticking backwards, and there's all these things that I want to accomplish, and I'm looking at that score. I'm looking at that scoreboard, just watching the clock tick backwards. And I think that sometimes I just feel like I don't even relate to other people because the pace that I'm trying to go at, and the timeline in which I'm trying to accomplish things feels so different, and it's often, just very candidly, something I feel like separates me from other people. And I think a lot of what I've tried to do over the 20 years that I've been, trying to build businesses and lead teams is have more empathy for how other people think and see and feel those situations, while also still being able to apply this really maybe OCD like sense of urgency to get big things done,
Yeah.
um,
I think it's important as a leader to, inspire people to do great things, but also it's really important to know when you're pushing too hard. And I think to me, I think of it less as a separation, but more as just a understanding and respect, and just nobody can do it alone. I think that, if you want to do great things, you don't accomplish it as an individual, you accomplish it as a team. And so it's not about how fast one person can get there. It's how fast can we get there together, and how happily can we get there together? Like I don't, again, if we go back to like what I love the numbers. I love that we're crushing it as a business. I'm really, really, really proud of that. But what I get up in the morning and think about, and when I go to bed thinking about, is how are people doing? Or, so for me, it's just it maybe that is the important check on my own sort of ways of being, and what I is just, I just really know and really believe, and like I'm so passionate that I'm not, the Supergoop success is not about me, and it's not about what I've done. It's about what a team of 70 people have done together, and down to every single person on the team, no matter what they're doing, and whether the consumer sees it or not. It's all, especially in a small business. I think one of the bigger lessons I've learned is like every single individual is just an extraordinary contributor. And I want them to feel that way because, it's like there's no more, there's nothing that gives me greater joy than being like, I know this person just really worked so hard on this and look at what we've achieved because of like what that person made possible. So I think it's a really important thing that you bring up, to sort of this is all a group effort.
Mhm. All right. So same time machine question. You take the time machine now back 5 years.
Mhm.
What personal or professional advice are you giving yourself and why?
So 5 years ago is when I started at Supergoop. So it's an interesting time to, and I think it's funny. I still have my original board deck, and I think I kind of knew where we needed to go, but I think it's, you're going to hear me repeat myself again. I think I've learned in those last 5 years just the power of every individual in getting there. And I came into this role believing in I had this wonderful head of HR at LVMH who said, Amanda, it's all about the people. And I believed that. I really did. But it's different to have that when you're in charge of everybody. And I was sort of running a marketing team then, and I love that team, and I still take a lot of pride in that, in what we had going on. But it was different than sort of understanding it as you're building a small business. So I think that's what I think I would just let myself understand that. And I'd let myself understand that 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 change, and that when you're running a young organization, is also going to change the org chart and the people around you, almost as quickly. So I think I've settled into a good place on that now.
Yeah. All right. What I'd love to get some of your perspective and advice on fundraising. And I think you have such a unique perspective, both as an operator and as an investor. And so as you saw those various consumer businesses come through your doors, in private equity, and then as you've been on the other side and, been raising capital, what's kind of your philosophy on fundraising, and what do you see folks do really well, and what are the big mistakes you see entrepreneurs and operators make?
So I think that in general, one of the things that I have learned along the way is, and these are going to sound like kind of two contradictory statements, but I'll try and connect them. One is that I think there's not enough conversation about kind of how little money can you raise. Um, and and there's usually headlines about big valuations and big amounts of money raised. And I think there's not enough conversation. And we're super capital efficient at Supergoop. We haven't raised a lot of money. So we haven't had fancy headlines about that stuff. And I take a lot of pride in that, because that means that we're building something really sustainable, that we, control our destiny, that we have, that our founders are still, central parts of the business. They haven't been diluted down to, I just think that it's not talked out. It's not the kind of thing that makes headlines. And I think it probably should. So I think that's one fundraising philosophy, and something that I would share with especially people at the beginning. The flip side of that is putting amazing people at the table with you, as you're going through this journey, is essential to your growth. So I would not say, oh, raise no money. I think it's about what's that right balance, and I think things tend to take longer and be more expensive than maybe you thought they would be. But finding incredible people to go on this journey with you, I think, is a huge game changer for, I know it's been for our founder. It certainly has been for me. And when I think about our investor group, I think about people who would go on that list of people who have had a profound effect on me as a leader and as a strategist. And so I think it's about finding the balance between those two. And that, that fundraising is a really important mechanism to drive growth at a business, but it's not the point. The point is the business, and what can the business do on its own. And so I think that's maybe a little bit less of a kind of common take on it. I think it comes a little bit because I come from a private equity background versus a venture capital background, that hammered into my head from a young age was
Yeah.
profitability, EBITDA, and cash flow, and all those fun things. So it's a little bit of a thing. And look, it is certainly impacted by the industry in which I operate, right? I'm in the consumer world. That's a different thing than being in tech or, healthcare or some of these other places that demand a lot more capital to get started. But I think it's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah. What do you think stands out as far as the folks that, are really exceptional at fundraising? And I think you brought up an important point, right? That your background's in private equity. And so it's a different investing philosophy than, angel investors or venture capital that are, not often relying on super mature businesses that are already profitable. But as you saw all these different folks come and raise capital from you, as you've been around fundraising, as you've been parts of it, again, what do you think are the distinguishing characteristics of those operators and entrepreneurs that do it really well?
I think you got to know your stuff. I think there can be, I believe in, substance over style, maybe, and just, I think, when somebody really has just a deep command of their business, and an understanding of what makes it work, of what its strengths are, what its opportunities are. I think you can see that. I think you can. So I think a lot of fundraising and people who are exceptionally good at it are people who are also great leaders, who are great masters of their craft, um, that are, maybe less about I'm great at fundraising. They're more at I'm great at running a business, and therefore people are going to want to give me money, because ultimately what I'm being given money to is to go run a business, not to fundraise, right? So it sort of goes back to that original point of being a master as a leader and as a CEO of your business. I think will come through. I think that the things that get funded um, you know, are really about a differentiated product and brand. Again, in my category, I always say to people, like, what can you do that nobody else can do? And what would happen if you weren't on the planet?
Mm-hmm.
What would there be a big gaping hole? Look, in the beauty world, it's never been easier to start a business, never been harder to scale one. And the barriers to entry are almost zero. And I think it only makes that more important, right? That I always, I think I have a gut reaction, to that. I think that's a very sort of product brand visceral thing, and then you have to have the operational chops to back that up. But I think without something really special, um, and that's what I saw in Supergoop when I first met Holly.
Mm-hmm.
Business wasn't, it wasn't super large, and just raised an early round of capital. And what bigger investment can you make than your own career?
Yeah.
And so there was something magical in what she had created, that I felt like the world would miss if it wasn't there.
Yeah.
The world would know, and the world would be different. And that's what I think gets, me really excited as as somebody who still thinks like an investor, is that kind of, and it doesn't come along that often. It's pretty
Yeah.
rare.
What are the beauty or consumer brands that you look at with awe and a lot of respect? Like when you think of what you're trying to build over time, what do you point to and say they just do it absolutely right? And not only what are those brands, but what is it that they do so right in your opinion?
So I'll use a couple of examples, and they're all from outside the beauty industry, because we really look at ourselves as like a category creator. Um, and so the brands that I admire the most are the ones who have created categories, who have changed our behavior, so they're the two that I hold in a lot of esteem are Nike and Starbucks, because I think they have done something that's changed our attitude towards a category. I mean, I always say, how many $6 lattes did you drink before Starbucks? And they've reached extraordinary scale without losing sight of who they are, without losing their magic, and I think as I look forward for Supergoop, that's how big we think. And it's really inspiring to have those kind of examples out there, that really that are just sort of cultural icons. So I think those are probably a couple that would come to mind right away. And I think that they're, in a newer brand, I'm a huge fan of what has been done at Warby Parker. I think it's just, again, they've created a category, they've changed how people approach something. They've proven that in this sort of next generation of brands that you can create something that's really unique and sustainable. I just think they've mastered branding and experience in a really, really unique way.
Yeah, I love that. We actually had one of the Warby Parker founders on here with us as well too. So
yeah, I think that they're also wonderful humans, so that helps too.
Yeah. So what does Supergoop look like 5 years from today? What's the business that you envision, that you go to sleep thinking about, and that you're excited about building?
Look, I'll go back to my mission. As I said at the beginning, it's what guides us every day. I mean, I think for us, we know that we'll be chipping away at where we're trying to go when the incidence of skin cancer goes down. When we go from 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 to 1 in 15, that's really how we're going to calibrate things. When we believe that, we always say we want wearing sunscreen to be like putting on a seatbelt, putting on a helmet, like brushing your teeth, like these things that are just second nature, and we can't imagine a world without them. That's how we're going to achieve our mission. So that, I think much more in those terms than, a certain number of sales and, or these distribution channels. But I do think globally, I think we're really having an amazing opportunity now of figuring out how to translate our message around the world. And that's just a really incredible experience to see the brand translate that way. But I go back to those bigger macro things, for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything that either today you most focus on and getting better as a leader, or that if you look over the last couple of years, you wish you had to do over on?
I think what I'm really working on now is, like I said, as we've scaled, I can't know everybody as deeply as an individual as I wish I could. And so that's something that I'm working on, is how to make sure that they, that I'm communicating effectively, that they still are able to understand, everybody understands, what the mission is and the goal, and that is cascaded effectively, and that no matter who you are in the organization, you really understand like what we're doing and why we're trying to do it, and that you understand how incredibly important your piece of the puzzle is to the entire pie. So I think that, and I still love coaching people one-on-one. And so I hope to never lose sight of that. But it's becoming harder to do it for everybody. And that's, that I think I'm starting to recognize that, but I would say to my team that the door is still always open.
Yeah.
So.
All right. If it's okay with you, I'd love to do a little bit of a speed round here. So we'll do a couple series of questions to get to know you, and maybe pass on some more of, your wisdom and advice to lots of folks. So start off, what's your best productivity hack these days?
Delegate.
Awesome. When do you wake up in the morning? When do you go to sleep at night?
I usually wake up whenever Henry, my 7-year-old, is in my face saying, "Mom, wake up." So 6.
Yeah.
I think sleep at night. Oh goodness. I've been burning the midnight oil lately. We have this amazing team in Asia that, that they get up around, into the office around 8:30 or 9. So I'm often up late with them, which I love. And so I don't know, 10:30, try. I need 8 hours. So I'm not, I wish I was one of those people that could kind of survive on less, but I'm not.
Do you think at any point in the next 2 years, we will go back to a traditional 9 to 5 office schedule for corporate employees and for knowledge workers?
When you say traditional 9 to 5, probably not, right? But will we go back to being in person? I certainly hope so. I've always believed in kind of taking the best of everything. Supergoop is about the best of direct to consumer and the best of wholesale and the best of, and so as we go forward at Supergoop, I hope we'll take, some of the real material wins out of this last year, but also not forget the magic that we had before we all got sent behind computer screens. So.
What's your biggest pet peeve in the workplace? What's your biggest frustration?
We don't have this at Supergoop, but I would say in general, just not sort of saying no, or not being like not trying to figure something out. Now, again, that's not happening where we are. We're always trying to figure out how to say yes, but I always believe where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. Sliding doors. If you had a completely different career, nothing like what looks like today, what would be your dream career outside of being a CEO of an amazing consumer brand.
And be back in that art gallery.
Very cool.
Maybe I'll still be. We'll see.
Well, I'm so appreciative and thankful for all your time today, Amanda. You're just wonderful. And so many of us are rooting you on. A story that I'm sure you hear from so many folks, unfortunately, and you met Jamie on our team, who is amazing and heads up, coordinating with amazing guests like you and all of our PR and comms. We had a close friend growing up, Brooke Wilson, and she very untimely and way too early passed away of skin cancer. And it was a shock and it was a surprise and just a beautiful person all the way around. And to know that, what you're doing is preventing, awful, horrible situations like that from happening. Like, there's a lot of us that, believe what we're doing is important. And I think it all is to some degree, but it's hard for, anyone to say that, in addition to making people feel better about how they look every single day, that you're changing the courses of people's health and maybe their overall, longevity. Like, that's a big deal. And so there's a lot of us here that are rooting you on and love the mission that, Supergoop stands for and everything that you've brought to it. And thank you for being so generous and thoughtful with your time and wisdom today. And I'm sure there's going to be even that many more people that are now excited to see everything you do going forward.
Thank you so much. So sorry to hear about your friend, but it certainly is what we're trying to get up and do every morning.
Yeah. Well, to everyone who continues to join us for the series, thank you so much. We're so appreciative for your time. I can certainly say that, now that the world's starting to open back up again, I know the last thing that, many of us want to do is spend more time in front of a screen. So the fact that so many thousands of people continue to join us for the series and send messages and words of support means so much. And we'll continue to have amazing guests like Amanda Baldwin. We have some really special folks coming up, including the CEO of Heineken and other amazing consumer brands as well. So stay tuned. We're going to continue to try to delight you all with incredible stories and leadership lessons and if I knew then conversations. And like I always say, stay safe, stay sane, enjoy your summer, everybody. And thank you, Amanda, again for your time. We really appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me.